The cell was cold, damp, and filled with shadows. Metal bars stood tall like spears, and chains rattled whenever the creature moved. They called it a monster, and maybe it was, for its body was massive and scarred, its skin thick and marked with strange glowing lines. Its eyes burned faintly in the dark, two embers that scared anyone who dared to look inside. Soldiers kept watch outside, though most stayed as far away as they could. Children sometimes came with stones, throwing them at the cage. While laughing, the monster growled low, but never struck back. Not because it lacked strength, but because the chains dug deep into its flesh, making escape impossible. It was doomed. Everyone said, doomed to rot in that cage until it starved. The creature remembered battles, flames, and skies painted with fire. It had been hunted across valleys, trapped by humans who feared its kind. Now it was alone, broken, a trophy to be mocked. No one saw it as anything more than a beast. No one except one. The man first came at night. A quiet figure who stopped by the bars when the world was silent. He did not laugh, he did not throw stones, he only stood. Watching. At first, the monster thought he was like the others, another human waiting for a show of fear. But this man did not jeer, did not curse, not spit. He only looked, his gaze steady, his face unreadable. The monster growled to scare him away, but the man did not move. He stayed until the moonlight faded, then left without a word. The next night he returned, standing again by the bars. The monster's heart beat faster, unsure if this human was brave or foolish. Days passed, and the visits continued. The guards muttered, calling the man strange, whispering that he was wasting his time. The monster wondered too, why come if not to mock or hurt? It tilted its head, watching the man in return, a dangerous curiosity forming. One night, the man placed a small metal cup near the bars. Water glistened inside, clear and pure. The monster froze, staring, its throat burning with thirst. No human had offered it anything but pain. Yet here was water. It reached slowly, chains clinking, and pulled the cup close. The water touched its lips, cool and life-giving. The taste was sharper than any memory, more precious than gold, for the first time since capture. The monster felt something other than hatred. The man said nothing. He only left the empty cup by the bars and walked away. The monster stared after him, chest heavy with questions. Why? It wondered. Why would a human give kindness to a beast? The next evening, the man returned again, and again the water came. The guards saw but did not stop him. Perhaps they thought it useless, but to the monster, it was everything. Every drop was a reminder that not all humans were the same. Every visit carved deeper into its heart, pulling it towards something it did not understand. The creature, once feared across fields of war, now sat in silence, waiting for footsteps, waiting for that gaze, waiting for water. And each night, the man came. Sometimes he stayed long, sometimes short, but always there. The monster's chains still burned. Its wounds still ached. But in the presence of that quiet human, it no longer felt entirely doomed. The monster tried to speak once, its voice low and broken from disuse. The sound startled even itself, a rough growl that carried words. Why? It rasped, eyes burning through the dark. The man froze, shocked, for he had never heard it speak, but the monster had no strength to finish the question. Its head dropped, silence swallowing its voice. The man did not laugh, did not call it a demon, did not run. Instead, he leaned closer, his face lit by torchlight, and though he did not answer, his eyes held something the monster could not name. Not hate, not fear, not disgust, something else. Something heavy, something that made the creature's chest tighten that night, as the monster lay on the cold ground, the chains biting deeper. Its mind turned restless. It remembered how humans shouted monster when they caught it. But now one human came every night with water, with silence, with a gaze that cut deeper than swords. It wondered if this was mercy or something darker. The thought haunted it, twisting inside like the chains on its limbs. The world still saw it as a beast, doomed and broken, but deep inside. The creature felt the first spark of doubt. Perhaps it was not only a monster. Perhaps this one human, with his dark kindness, would change everything. And in the shadows of the cell, the monster waited for him to return, because in a life filled only with chains, the quiet human had become the only crack of light. The night air was colder than before. The torches outside the prison flickered weakly, and the monster sat in silence, waiting. Its chains cut into the skin. Its breath was shallow, but its eyes searched the shadows beyond the bars. It had not spoken again since that one broken word. But the memory of its own voice haunted it, reminding the creature that it was more than just growls and rage. And then, as if drawn by that memory, the quiet human came again. He stepped carefully, boots crunching against the dirt floor, torchlight glinting off the metal bars. The monster raised its head, slow, heavy, like a beast lifting a weight to grate. The human did not carry a weapon, did not bring soldiers. He only brought the same cup of water, placing it gently by the bars. No words, no questions, just a silent offering. The monster drank slowly, eyes never leaving the human's face. The water slid down its throat, easing the burn. But it was not the water that mattered most. It was the way the human looked, not with hatred, not with fear, but with something else, something that made the creature restless, uneasy, alive. The guards whispered nearby, their laughter sharp and cruel. They said the man was wasting time, that monsters did not deserve mercy, but he ignored them. His gaze fixed on the chained being, as if nothing else in the world existed. The monster felt heat rise inside its chest, a feeling more painful than chains. Why, it thought, why does he look at me like that? Every night became the same ritual. The human walked in silence, placed the cup, stood, and left. Yet his eyes always lingered, holding steady against the monster's burning glare. It was not pity. No, it was not weakness either. It was a gaze that seemed to say, "See you." The creature began to wait for that gaze more than the water. It counted the nights, the torches, the footsteps, until at last he appeared again. When he came, the monster would straighten, chains rattling like broken bells. When he left, emptiness returned, a hollow ache, deeper than hunger. One night, storm clouds covered the moon. Thunder shook the walls. The guards cursed, frightened of the storm, and left their posts to hide inside. But the human still came, his cloak soaked with rain, his face pale in the lightning's flash. He placed the cup, though his hands shook from the cold. The monster leaned close, its voice rumbling low. "You?" "Why?" The human froze, staring at the creature's glowing eyes for the first time. He answered, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, "Because no one else will." The words hit harder than chains. The monster pulled back, trembling, unable to speak again. No one else will. What did that mean? What did he want? The creature felt anger rise, but behind the anger was something else, something it had no name for. The man lingered that night longer than usual. He did not speak again. But he did not look away, even when lightning split the sky. The storm raged, rain poured through the cracks. The ground turned to mud. But in that chaos, the two of them were locked in silence, their eyes never breaking. When dawn came, the human left, his cloak heavy with rain. The monster remained, chains biting deeper, yet its chest burned with something it could not silence. It had been feared, hated, cursed for all its life. But now one gaze cut through all of that, breaking the wall it had built inside. The other humans looked at it as a beast, but this one looked as though it were more. The monster began to wonder. If perhaps it was, perhaps the world was wrong. Perhaps it was not only claws and teeth, perhaps there was something else waiting to be seen. That night, when he returned again, the monster leaned forward, pressing against the bars its breath. Shook, its voice cracked, but the words forced themselves free. Not monster, it whispered, chains rattling with every sound. The human's eyes widened. But he did not laugh, did not shout for the guards. Instead, he nodded once, slow and heavy, and said, I know. The monster's chest tightened. A sound escaped its throat, half growl, half sob. It had no tears, no softness left. Yet those two words broke through every wall it had. The human knew. He said he knew. No one else believed, no one else cared. But this one man looked and saw. From that night, the gaze became more than silence. It became a lifeline, a chain stronger than iron. A weight that pulled the monster closer. Every night, it waited not for water, not for food, but for the eyes that saw it. The eyes that refused to call it beast. The world outside the cage did not change. The guards still laughed. The children still mocked. The chains still burned. But inside the darkness of that prison, one human's gaze lit a flame, and the monster began to fear something far. The prison was quieter than usual. The guards had gone to drink, their laughter fading into the night. Only the monster remained, curled against the stone floor. Waiting, the air was damp, heavy, filled with the smell of rust and wet chains. It no longer waited for food. It no longer cared for sleep. It waited only for footsteps, steady and certain. And when they came, when that familiar sound echoed through the corridor, the monster lifted its head. The human had returned. He walked slowly, carrying his small torch, his face calm, unreadable. In his hand was the same cup filled with water. He placed it near the bars and stood silently, just as he always did. But tonight was different. The monster's chest was restless, its throat tight, its heart heavy with unspoken words. For nights it had tried to stay silent, tried to accept the kindness without question, but its mind burned, twisting with confusion. Why give water? Why stand in silence? Why look at it as though it were more? Then a beast, the questions became chains, heavier than the ones around its body. It leaned forward, claws scraping against stone. Its voice came rough, broken, the sound of a throat unused to speech. The words fell heavy, jagged, almost painful. Why? The human froze, eyes wide, staring through the bars. For a long moment, he said nothing, as if afraid the sound would vanish if he spoke. The monster forced more words, each one cutting its throat. Why? Don't you kill me, end me. The silence that followed was heavier than any chain. The torch crackled. The rain outside drummed against stone. The human's face was pale, but his eyes did not look away. At last, he answered, his voice low. Steady, because you are not just a monster. The creature flinched, its claws curled tight. The words struck deeper than any blade. Not just a monster, he said. But what else could it be? All its life it had been hunted, cursed, caged. It had killed in battles, destroyed villages, brought fear wherever it walked. And now this one human, this small, fragile being, looked at it and spoke as though it were something more. The monster's growl filled the cell, half in rage, half in despair. It pulled at the chains until its skin bled, the metal cutting deep. No, it snarled, though its voice shook. Am nothing but monster. Its body trembled, its voice cracked. Its chest felt like fire, but the human did not step back, did not raise his hands in fear. He stood firm, and his words came again. Then why do you weep when you think no one sees? The monster froze, its glowing eyes wide. It had not known, he noticed, at night. When it thought itself hidden in the shadows, it had shuddered with sounds like sobs, not rage, not pain, but something deeper. And this human had seen, had known. The torchlight flickered. Shadows danced across the cell. The monster lowered its head, unable to meet the man's gaze. Its breath came heavy, ragged, as though the truth itself was a weight too great. The human knelt near the bars, closer than ever before. His face was calm, but his eyes carried sorrow. "You are not what they call you," he said. "You are what you choose to be." The words burned like fire in the monster's chest. "Choice," he said. But choice had been stolen long ago, taken with chains, with battles, with hate. Yet something in the man's voice made the creature doubt, made it wonder if even now, even in a cage, it could still be more. The monster wanted to roar, to break the silence, to drown the words with anger, but instead it whispered, broken and fragile. Then, "What am I?" The man leaned closer, his eyes steady, his voice firm. "You are alive," he said. "And that is enough." The monster shuddered, its chains rattling with the force of its breath. Alive, yes, it was alive, but never before had. That word felt like a gift. Never before had life meant anything but survival, pain and war. Now, with one human's gaze, with one human's words, life felt different. It felt dangerous. The guards returned, drunk and laughing. Breaking the silence, they jeered at the monster, threw scraps of rotten food through the bars. But the creature barely heard them. Its mind still wrapped around the human's voice. Not just a monster, it repeated in its thoughts. The words cut and healed at the same time when the guards left again. The human stood, his face unreadable. He did not say more. He only placed his hand against the cold bars. The monster stared at that hand, trembling with a hunger it did not understand. Not hunger for food, not hunger for blood, but hunger for the truth of those words. When he left, silence returned, but it was no longer the same silence. It was heavy, alive, filled with the echo of first words. The monster lay against the stone floor, chains digging deep. But its mind repeated the same thought over and over. Not just a monster, and for the first time, it began to wonder if its doom was not the chains, but the kindness of one human who dared to speak. Asterisk, the nights grew longer, the cold sharper, and the chains heavier. Yet the monster no longer felt only darkness. Each evening it waited for the quiet man. Each evening it repeated those words in its mind, not just a monster. When the footsteps finally came, the creature straightened chains, scraped the stone, eyes glowed faintly in the dark. The man appeared, torch in hand, cloak wrapped tight against the wind. He set down the cup of water. But this time he did not leave it in silence. He stayed longer, standing still, his eyes fixed on the broken beast. The monster growled softly, restless. Its throat ached with words it could not form. It wanted to ask again, why? Why he came? Why he gave kindness? But before it could speak, the man's voice cut through the silence. "I know what you think of yourself," he said, his tone low, almost a whisper. "You believe you are cursed, doomed, nothing but a monster." The creature's claws dug into the stone floor, a low snarl rising from its chest. The words hurt because they were true. The man stepped closer, his face half in shadow. "But I have seen worse than you," he said. The monster tilted its head, eyes narrowing. Worse, it thought. What could be worse than me? The man's gaze grew distant, heavy with memory. "I was a soldier," he confessed. "I fought in wars far from here, wars where humans fought humans, not beasts." The torchlight flickered across his scarred hands as he gripped the bars. I saw men burn villages for sport. I saw children dragged into cages. I saw mercy strangled by greed. His voice cracked, though he forced it steady. I have seen monsters, and they did not wear claws or glowing eyes. They wore human faces. The monster froze, its chest tight, for the first time. It heard sorrow in the man's voice. Not just calm, not just silence, but pain. The words struck deeper than any insult. Humans, it thought. Humans did this to their own kind. The man looked up, meeting the creature's burning gaze. You think you are the monster, he said. But I know what true monsters are. His voice trembled as though each word carried a weight he had. Carried for years, the monster's growl died in its throat. Silence filling the cell once again. The chains felt colder. But the creature's chest burned hotter. It remembered its own past. Battles where it tore through men and machines. Villages it had crushed in rage. It had been feared, hated, hunted, but now it wondered, were those battles only survival? Was its bloodlust born from war or from choice the human leaned against? The bars his eyes hollow with memory. I killed too, he said. I became like them. Because war changes men, it breaks them, turns them into something they swore they'd never be. He lifted his sleeve, revealing scars, deep and twisted, carved into his skin like a history that could not be erased. The monster stared, its breath heavy. It had never thought of humans as broken, only cruel. Yet here stood one who bore wounds deeper than its own. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the storm outside filled the silence, wind rattling against the stone. Finally, the monster asked, its voice low and harsh, "Why?" "Show me this." The human's lips curled into something that was not a smile. Not sorrow, but something between. "Because you are chained like I was," he said. "You think you are doomed. But chains can break, and even broken things can. Choose what they become." The creature trembled, its claws scraping the floor. It hated the words, yet needed them, hated the light, yet could not look away. It wanted to deny, to roar, that it was nothing but beast, but deep inside, a flicker of something else grew stronger. The human did not reach for a weapon, did not spit curses. Instead, he spoke of his nightmares, his regrets, the things he had done and could not forget, and the monster listened, though it did not know why. Perhaps because, for the first time, it felt equal, not a beast before a man, but two souls, broken and chained, sharing truths in the dark. The torchlight dimmed, shadows swallowing the walls. The human finally stepped back, his face pale, his voice tired. "You think kindness is weakness," he said softly. "But sometimes kindness is the heaviest burden of all." The monster's heart pounded, its breath uneven. It lowered its head, growling not in anger, but in confusion. It had known blades, fire, chains, cruelty. But it had never known this, kindness that cut deeper than hate. Kindness that felt dangerous, heavy, almost unbearable. When the man left, silence returned. But it was no longer the silence of despair. It was the silence of questions, of doubt, of shadows that whispered, "What if?" The monster lay against the stone, its mind restless, for the first time. Its nightmares were not of fire or blood, but of one human's gaze. A gaze that carried both sorrow and kindness. The night burned with fire and screams. The prison walls shook as explosions thundered outside. Raiders had come, wild men with blades and torches. Storming the outpost like hungry wolves, the guards ran in panic, some fighting, most fleeing. Their shouts lost in the chaos. Inside the cell, the monster raised its head. Glowing eyes blazing, smoke drifted through the cracks. Chains clinked with every restless movement. The beast had been caged for too long. And now the world outside tore itself apart. It could smell blood, hear the clash of steel, taste the fear in the air. The footsteps came, but this time they were not calm or steady. The quiet man rushed down the corridor, torchlight shaking, face grim. He reached the bars, breathing heavy, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the lock. The monster growled, confusion twisting inside. "What? You do?" it rasped. The human's voice was sharp, urgent. Unlike the calm tone of nights before, "They will kill everything here," he said. "They will not spare you. They will burn this place to the ground." His eyes met the monster's, fierce and unyielding. "I will not let them take you." The words struck like thunder. Not let them take you. The creature had been chained, cursed, doomed, and yet this fragile man stood here, defying the chaos to free it. The monster pulled at the chains, muscles straining, metal biting into its flesh. The human cursed, striking the lock with a stolen blade. Sparks flying in the dark. Above, the ceiling shook as fire spread, ash falling like black snow. Screams echoed closer. Raiders storming the lower halls. The monster's breath came heavy, its body trembling between rage and hope. "Why?" it growled. "Why risk life for beast?" The man slammed the blade again, his voice fierce. "Because you are not a beast," he shouted. "Not to me." The lock cracked. The chain split with a screech that echoed like thunder. The monster staggered forward, unbound for the first time in endless nights. The pain of freedom seared its body. Raw flesh exposed where iron had bitten deep. Yet it stood taller, heavier. Its claws scraping the ground, the raiders burst into the corridor. Torches blazing, weapons raised, they froze at the sight of the unchained monster, their faces twisting in terror. One screamed, "The beast is loose," and rushed forward with a spear. The monster roared, a sound that shook the walls, its claws tearing through the air. The spear snapped like wood, the raider crushed beneath its strength. The human flinched but did not run. Instead, he pressed himself against the wall, torch in hand, shouting above the chaos. "This way, come." The monster turned, chains dragging behind like broken wings. It followed, smashing aside raiders who dared block the path. Each strike painted the stones red. Each roar sent men fleeing, but with every kill, the words of the human echoed in its mind. Not a beast. The corridor shook, fire racing across the ceiling. The human led the way through smoke and ash. Coughing, but never stopping, the monster stayed close, its massive body shielding him from arrows, blades, and flame. For the first time, they fought not as man and monster, but side by side. At last, they reached the gate, but it was blocked. Raiders swarmed the entrance, their leader clad in black armor. Shouting orders, the human cursed under. His breath gripping the blade tighter, the monster stepped forward, its growl shaking the ground. Chains still clung to its arms, but now they swung like weapons. It tore into the raiders with savage force, crushing armor, breaking steel. Blood sprayed, screams rose, and still it fought. Yet when one raider fell to his knees, dropping his weapon, crying for mercy, the monster raised its claw to strike. But the human's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop," he shouted, his voice desperate. "Don't." The monster froze, its claw trembling inches from the raider's throat. The man's eyes locked onto its own, filled with fire, not fear. "Mercy," he said, his voice raw. "Show mercy." The beast's chest heaved, its breath ragged. Mercy, a word it had never known, never understood. Its claw shook, every instinct screaming to kill, to survive. But the human's gaze held it still. Slowly, the creature lowered its hand, chains clattering to the ground. The raider fled, stumbling into the night, leaving behind only silence and smoke. The monster stood trembling, Unsure if what it had done was strength or weakness, the human stepped closer, placing a hand against its scarred arm. "You see," he said softly, "you can choose." The flames roared higher. The night screamed with war, but in that moment, the monster felt something it had never felt before. Not rage, not hunger, not hate, but the weight of mercy. A weight. Heavier than chains. The gate was broken, the flames roared, and the night screamed with death. The monster stood free for the first time in endless days, chains hanging loose like broken wings. Its chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, the scent of blood and fire thick in the air. Around it lay the bodies of raiders, their weapons scattered, their screams still echoing in the smoke. The human stood beside it, sword in hand, his face pale but steady. He looked small, fragile, next to the towering beast. Yet his presence was unshaken. The monster growled low, its claws dripping red, its mind torn between rage and the memory of that one word, mercy. It had spared a man because the human told it to. And now that choice weighed heavier than any kill. More raiders poured through the broken gate, their eyes wide with fury, their voices rising in cruel shouts. They came with spears, axes, torches, desperate to slay the beast before it slaughtered them all. The monster roared, a sound so fierce the very stones trembled. It lunged, chains whipping through the air, crushing steel and bone, scattering. Men like leaves in a storm, the human fought too, his blade flashing in the firelight. He was not as strong, not as fast, but he was precise. Every strike aimed true, every movement sharp. Together, man and beast carved a path of survival through the sea of enemies. But then it happened. One raider fell to his knees, blood spilling from his wounds, eyes wide with terror. He dropped his weapon and raised trembling hands, begging for his life. The monster's claw rose high, ready to strike, its instincts screaming to end the threat. But before it could strike, the human shouted again, his voice desperate. "Stop!" The monster froze, the weight of that word slamming against its chest. It turned its head, eyes burning with confusion. The human stepped forward, blade still in hand, but his gaze locked on the creature. "No more," he said, his voice raw. "He's beaten." "You don't need to kill him," the raider whimpered, crawling back. The monster's claws trembled, rage and doubt tearing at its mind. In war, mercy meant death. Weakness meant chains, but the human's eyes burned brighter than fire, commanding without force, and for the second time the monster lowered its hand. The raider fled into the smoke, his cries swallowed by the night. The creature's chest heaved, torn between instinct and something new. It turned on the human, growling low. "Why stop?" it demanded, its voice sharp, broken. "Enemy live, enemy kill again." The man shook his head, sweat and ash streaking his face. "No," he said firmly. "We are not like them. We don't kill because we can. We choose." He stepped closer, placing a trembling hand on the beast's blood-stained arm. "That is what makes us more than monsters." The words struck deep. More than monsters. The creature pulled back, its body shaking, its breath like thunder. It had killed all its life. Survival was blood. Survival was death. And yet, twice now, it had stopped because of this human. Twice now, it had chosen not to kill. The battle raged on, but the monster fought differently. Its claws still tore through raiders. Its chains still crushed armor. But when enemies fell and begged, it hesitated. Some it spared, some it let flee. And each time it did, its chest burned with a strange taste. Its chest burned with a strange, his eyes never leaving the creature, through the smoke and screams. Their gazes locked again and again. One small, fragile man, guiding a beast with nothing but words. And the beast obeyed, though it did not understand why. The night stretched long, every moment filled with fire and blood. At last, the raiders broke. Fleeing into the dark, their leader cut down, their torches abandoned, the outpost stood ruined. Bodies scattered, but silence slowly returned. Only the crackle of flames and the heavy breaths of man and monster filled the air. The creature stood, tall among the ruin, its glowing eyes watching the human. Blood dripped from its claws, but not all of it belonged to enemies. Its own wounds burned, deep and raw. The human limped forward, his sword dragging, his body weak, yet he stood before the beast without fear. The monster growled softly, its voice uncertain. Mercy. Pain. It rasped. Mercy. Heavy. The human nodded slowly, his eyes filled with something deeper than sorrow. Yes, he whispered. Mercy is heavier than chains, but it is the only weight worth carrying. The beast lowered its head, trembling for all its life. It had carried rage, hunger, hate. Now it carried something new, something darker, something brighter, kindness. The battlefield was silent at last. The fires smoldered, the torches burned low, and the night air was thick with smoke. The outpost lay in ruins, its walls broken, its stones painted red. The monster stood in the center of it all, its chains hanging loose, its claws dripping, its chest rising and falling with the weight of survival. The human limped forward, his sword dragging, his face pale from blood and exhaustion, yet his eyes were steady, his voice calm as he spoke. It's over, he whispered. For now, the monster turned, its glowing eyes fixed on him. Over. Yes, the battle was over, but inside its chest, the war still raged. The creature growled low, uncertain. It had killed. It had spared, and both choices burned. It had felt mercy, and mercy had cut deeper than chains. Now it stood free. Nothing holding it, nothing binding it. It could walk away, vanish into the dark, leave the human behind, but it did not move. The man's hand trembled as he touched the broken bars of the ruined gate. You are free now, he said, his voice soft, almost tired. You can leave. No one will stop you. The words echoed in the night, heavy and final. Free, the monster thought. It had dreamed of this moment through endless nights of chains and pain. Freedom was the only hope it had ever clung to. And yet, when freedom stood before it, the creature did not rejoice. Instead, it felt fear. Fear of leaving the one human who had given it water, silence, mercy. Fear of leaving the only soul who had looked at it and said, "You are not just a monster." The beast's claws dug into the dirt, its chest trembling slowly. It lowered its massive form until it knelt before the human. The man's eyes widened, his torchlight shaking as he whispered, "What are you doing?" The monster's voice was rough, broken, but steady. "Not leave," it rasped. "Not leave you." The human's lips parted, his face filled with shock, with something close to sorrow. "You don't owe me anything," he said. But the beast shook its head. Chains clattering like broken bells. Chains broke. It growled. "But your eyes." Stronger than chains, the silence that followed was heavier than battle. The human stepped closer, his hand reaching to rest against the creature's scarred arm. "You are no monster," he whispered. "Unless you choose to be." The words struck deep, deeper than any wound. The creature shuddered, its glowing eyes dimming as though tears it could not shed burned within. It had been feared, hunted, hated. It had called itself a monster, had believed it doomed. But now, for the first time, it wondered if it could be something else. Not beast, not curse, not weapon, but alive. Simply alive. The ruins groaned. The wind carried the stench of fire and ash. Yet in that broken place, two figures stood, one human, one once called monster. the man broken by war. The beast broken by chains, both scarred, both burdened, both. Alive, the human turned, looking out at the night. "There will be more battles," he said. "More men who call you beast, more chains waiting to bind you." His voice grew harder, heavier. "But if you walk with me, you will not face them alone." The monster's chest rumbled, a growl that was not rage but something deeper. It lowered its head, as if bowing. "Walk," it rasped. "With you." The man gave a small nod, though his eyes shone with pain and doubt. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. He knew others would fear, would hate, would try to kill. But he also knew that somewhere in the shadows, kindness had changed a beast. And if kindness could do that, then perhaps it could change more. The dawn broke slowly, pale light creeping. Across the ruins, the smoke drifted upward, carrying the night's screams away. The monster rose to its full height, no longer bound by iron, but by choice. The human leaned against it, using its strength to walk. Together, they left the ruins. Their footsteps slow, but steady. The world would still call the creature a monster. The world would still hunt it, still curse its name, but in its heart, it carried something no chain could ever break. The dark kindness of one human, a kindness that hurt, that weighed heavy. That haunted its soul, but also a kindness that gave it life. And as they vanished into the horizon, man and monster, the story of doom turned into something else. Not salvation, not peace,